All right. Greetings, everyone from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today on speech rhythm. Before we start, I would like just to say some housekeeping matters. First of all, please, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share in the Q&A. I will be sharing them with the speaker after they finish their presentation. We will have two speakers, as you know, today. Each speaker will have time to answer your questions or comments after their presentation. As for the e-certificates, we will be providing e-certificates within a week from the webinar. I'll be sharing a link towards the end of the webinar for you to evaluate the webinar and also to write your name for the e-certificates. So don't worry about the certificates. They will be issued within a week after this webinar. Now it's time to start the webinar. So allow me please to welcome our distinguished speakers for today. We are truly honored to have two distinguished speakers today. I'm very grateful that they actually accepted our invitation. The first speaker with us today is Dr. Mikael Orden. Dr. Mikael received his degree in teaching English and German as foreign languages and a doctorate in computational linguistics in the Russian Federation. After that, he worked in Bangor, UK, at the Center of Research on Bilingualism, and then at Ulster University in Italy at CISA, where he was mentored by Jack Meller, and then he moved to Bielefeld in Germany to head his own research project. In 2015, he joined the Basque Center for Cognition, Brain and Language, before moving further west to Portugal, where he now has the position of a principal investigator at the Coimbra Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Translational Research. Michael, thank you very much. Mikael, thank you very much for joining us today. And he will be talking
for this nice introduction
in speech processing. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Okay. I thought maybe it would be okay if the order is in reverse, because we were thinking that Leona was going to introduce some ideas, which I will use in my presentation, so that we don't have to repeat the same things twice, so that
Definitely.
I can build on what she has already presented to people.
Definitely. So let me introduce Dr. Leona as well. Dr. Leona Polyanskaya, received her degree in education and gained several years of practical experience as a school teacher. She worked as a primary school teacher and as English teacher at secondary and high school levels. She made a decision to become a researcher because she noticed a gap between common practices in classroom, the needs and expectations of the students and society, and the academic work. She wanted to combine practical experience and science to facilitate language learning and reduce accentedness in foreign language speech. She enrolled in Universität Bielefeld, Germany, as a PhD student. She defended in 2015, and then her research career developed in Germany, Italy, and Spain. She is now dividing her workload between Universidad de Coimbra in Portugal and Universität Göttingen in Germany, and she leads the ERC project with over €1 million. So thank you very much, Dr. Leona. And actually, we are honored that Dr. Leona is also a research fellow of the Applied Linguistic Research Lab. And she will be talking today about non-native rhythm in second language speech and accentedness. So Leona, thank you for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to present the results of the work. And now I will share the screen just to be sure that I can share the sound, right? And the screen. So now you should see my presentation, right? Because
yes, we do.
Yeah, good, lovely. All right, 3 seconds. Okay, lovely. So we can start. And I have another tiny question about the laser. Can you see it? Can you see it? Good.
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So now let's start. So today I will talk about the contribution of prosodic timing patterns into perceived foreign accent. I will present you the battery of the experiment. First, I will start with the production, and then with the several of the perception, with the results of several perception experiments. So, all right. From the previous studies, we know that. We know that both sounds and prosody contribute to perceived foreign accent. And there are a lot of debates what makes the bigger contribution, segments or prosody. But we think that this question is very important because it will help in second language acquisition teaching. So we wanted, during our work, we wanted to contribute to this debate. We wanted to see the contribution of timing patterns, and in particular, the speech rhythm and speech rate. The word rhythm is a very global phenomenon with a multiple definition. And there are a lot of debate what is speech rhythm. And first, I'd like to make it clear how speech rhythm will be understood in this study. So in this experiment, we define speech rhythm as a patterns in variability in duration of vocalic and consonantal intervals and syllables. So these patterns of variability are captured by the so-called rhythm metrics. These metrics can be applied to the duration of phonemes, syllables, vocalic, and consonantal intervals. The most widely used rhythm metrics are standard deviation of duration, Varka coefficient, and percentage of vocalic intervals. So these are metrics how we can measure the rhythm. Standard deviation in duration and Varka coefficient and percentage of vocalic intervals, these metrics depends on the syllabic structure of the language, syllable complexity, consonantal phonotactic rules, degree of vowel reduction. The languages like German or Russian, which have reduction, complex syllables, and long consonantal clusters, will have higher standard deviation in duration of vowels, consonant, and syllables than languages like Italian, with simple syllables, no reduction, and no consonantal clusters. However, standard deviation also depends on speech tempo. The higher tempo means shorter vowels, consonants, and syllables, which means smaller standard deviation. Varka coefficient includes dividing by the mean, which shows that same property of the language like standard deviation, but is less dependent on tempo or average duration of syllables, vowels, and consonants. %V is the proportion of vowels in a sentence. It indicates the syllabic structure and inventory. Languages which only allow simple CV syllables, like Italian, usually have higher %V than languages like German, which allow consonantal clusters. So %V is not dependent on speech tempo. There are also other metrics such as PVA. PVI is the pairwise variability index that shows variability in duration not on the whole sentence, but locally, pairwise. These are two versions of PVA. Normalized, which does not depend on tempo, and non-normalized, which does depend on tempo. The control and compression index measured the language-specific degree of segmental lengthening and shortening. Some languages allow lower degree of compression and maintain segmental duration in unstressed position more strictly than other languages. So, languages which are thought rhythmically different have different patterns of durational variability. We know that we can divide languages into languages which with more with lower variability in duration and with higher variability in duration. And if you need to imagine this, you can imagine that you can take the one sentence, for example, the dog is eating the bone. And just imagine that you are changing all consonant into the th and all vowels into the r. And in that case, you will hear this difference. So here is the example of the language with lower variability.
こちらの方は形成外科の専門家です。
Could you hear it? Okay, good. And now imagine that we're dividing, that we're changing all consonant into the th and all vowels into the r. In that case, the language with such type of rhythmic patterns will sound like this. So lower variability, it's a kind of machine gun rhythm. And now let's look at the different type of rhythm which with a higher variability in duration. This is the original sentence.
The next local elections will take place during the winter.
And now let's hear the rhythm. So the idea is that lower variability in duration, higher variability in duration, different type of rhythm.
こちらの方は
Okay. From the previous experiment, a number of previous studies show that speech rhythm in English as a second language develops from more syllable time to more stress time. And it was reported in these studies, which are here. So, as I told you, on our previous study, we showed that speech rhythm as a second language, as a L2, rhythm develops in English as a second language. And we can see that people who learned second language, who learned English as a beginner, intermediate, and advanced were differ in a different levels in tempo, variation in duration, and this. Okay, probably I need to explain it again. So yeah, that's true. All right. So what we did, first of all, we looked at the tendency how speech rhythm develops as a first acquisition. So we looked how kids learn native language, which was English. And also we looked at the same tendency when French and German also learn English at 3 different levels. So, and what we found that our results show that speech tempo increases with the proficiency. We also found that variation in duration increases, and syllables of the beginners are more or less equal, and syllables from the advanced learners are different. And some of them, if you look at this scheme, some of them were long with the advanced level, some of them was short, and some of them was long. And we also found that the same changes were detected both for French and German learners of English, but the French varied duration less than German. That's what we found when we did production experiments. And based on the results of the production experiment, where we found that rhythm and tempo change as a mastery in English as a second language grows, advanced learners speak faster and with higher degree of variability. So we asked the questions, are these changes perceived by English native speakers? And do these changes contribute to foreign accent? And in what proportion do rhythm and speech rate contribute to foreign accent? With these questions, we started the preparation for the perception experiment. So we recorded German and French learners of English into 3 different levels: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. To be sure that our participants who we recorded really had these 3 levels, we used to check their level, we used pronunciation test, interview, and sentence elicitation. So that was the procedure for the recording. The information interview included answers to simple questions related to biography, hobbies, choice of studies or work, preferences in music and reading, and so on. So the interview were listened to by 3 different English teachers, and each interview was assessed for grammar accuracy, richness of vocabulary, and fluency. These assessments and also the results of the pronunciation test were used to split the speakers into 3 proficiency groups: low intermediate, intermediate, and advanced learners. During the recording session, we showed our participants the pictures with the sentence. So here you can see the example. This is the dog, and the participant was reading that the dog is eating the bone. We showed all 33 pictures to our participants with the sentence, and then we showed them the same pictures one by one and asked them to produce the sentence. But this time, the picture was without the sentence, so they need to produce the sentence from memory. So we recorded these 33 sentences. Okay. And after that, these 33 sentences from all participants were used to calculate the rhythm measures and to study the rhythm development in English as a second language. So this speech corpus was used in perception experiment also to find out if rhythm and tempo differences between proficiency levels are perceived, if these differences influence the degree of perceived foreign accent, and if rhythm or tempo in L2 English are perceptually more relevant. So for the first perception experiment, we selected sentences from German learners of English, and we made sa-sa-sa stimuli from these sentences, where I explained it, where I already told you about the procedure where we change all vowels into the S and all consonant into the A. And this transformation removes all differences on segments, intonation, stress and leaves only differences on rhythm and tempo. So now you can see, you can hear the example of these sentences, what we got. This is the original sentence.
The dog is eating the bone.
From the advanced learner. And this is the sentence, sa stimulus. Again, another sentence from advanced learner
The cat is chasing the mouse.
and sa stimulus. Now the example from the beginner. Original.
The dog is eating a bone.
And another example from the beginner
The cat is chasing the mouse.
and sa stimulus. So we prepared this stimulus and we asked 25 native English speaker listeners to participate in our experiment. During the experiment, during the initial presentation of the experiment, we played our participants this sa stimulus, and we told them that from advanced, we played the sentence from advanced learner, and we said that these are the sentences from the exotic language with the name of Buraba. We played the sentence from the sa stimulus from intermediate speakers, and we told our participants that these are the sentences from an exotic language with the name of Losto, and we played our participants the sounds from the stimulus from the beginners, and we told and we said that these are the sentences from the exotic language Mahutu. So that was the presentation of the stimulus. After initial presentation, we made training session when we played sentences to our participants and we asked them to say if this is the sentence of the exotic language Losto, Mahuto, or Buraba. During the training session, we had feedback. After that, after the training session, we did the testing session, where we did not, the different sentences were from the training session and for the testing session. So, and for the analysis, we used only the answer from the testing session. Now, let's look at the first result, what we got. We got 270 stimulus and 79 sentences were identified as Buraba, 67 were identified as Losto, and 53 was identified as Mahutu. 71 stimuli had two modes and or two most frequent answer, and were excluded from the analysis. So we did association analysis, and you can see here that we did not, so the results were, the effect was significant, but the effect was very small. So we can see from this table that there are more powerful predictors of the most frequent responses than the proficiency level of the speakers whose speech was converted into the sa stimulus. And you can also see that here that some stimuli classified as Losto and Mahutu have more or less equal duration, equal intervals. Other have long and short intervals. If you look at the scheme, if you these are the sentences Losto and Mahuto, and these are the scheme of the sentences of Buraba. And you can see that some of the syllables are more or less equal, and some of them have variability in duration, and the same also for the Buraba. So the variability in duration within these languages were the same and the same as I said, the same was for Buraba. So we could say is that people listen for tempo and ignore rhythm differences between the stimuli to classify them into the categories. To test the hypothesis that people listened for tempo and ignore rhythm differences between the stimuli to classify them into categories, we decided to do the regression analysis. We put all these sentences together again, and we run regression analysis, and as dependent variable, we use measure of tempo and rhythm. So dependent variable was frequency of Buraba, response for each stimulus, frequency of Losto, response for each stimulus, and frequency of Mahuto, response for each stimulus. And if you look at the results, we can see for all three languages, only tempo measures were significant predictors. So we can conclude that when listeners perform classification tasks, they use tempo measures and ignore measures of duration variability or rhythm. And we thought that to continue our work, we thought that maybe on linguistic stimulus, the result will be different. Maybe German and English are rhythmically closed, and the detected developmental changes are not sufficient to perceived as rhythmic changes. So, to continue our work, we changed the research question. Now we asked, does the development of speech rhythm in L2 reduce the strength of the perceived foreign accent? And for the stimuli, we decided to work with French and German learners of English. So, to answer this question, next perception was done. We prepared two sets of stimuli, one from German learners of English and one from French learners of English. Each set consists of 3 versions of each 50 sentences. Sentences from the beginner, intermediate, and advanced learners. And we prepared the stimuli which were different, stimuli 3 versions of each sentences. We prepared the stimuli which were differ only in tempo. We prepared the stimuli which were differ only in rhythm. And we prepared the stimuli which were different only in rhythm and tempo. So how we prepared the stimuli which were different in rhythm and in tempo and separate. To prepare the stimuli, we took duration from German and German learners of English and French learners of English, and the sounds and melody from the native English speaker. So this is the original sentence.
So dog is eating the bone.
And now this is the transformation with the duration of the learners and with the sounds and melody of the native English speaker.
The dog is eating the bone.
So then we did this sentence on 10% faster and 10% slower. And that's what we got.
The dog is eating the bone. The dog is eating the bone. The dog is eating the bone.
In that case, we received the new sentence differ only in tempo, not in rhythm. Also, we prepared the flat version.
The dog is eating the bone. The dog is eating the bone. The dog is eating the bone.
Flat version, it is the version without intonation contour. Now, how from this sentence, we took overall sentence duration from slow, normal, and fast version. No, sorry, it's just yeah. And the new sentence differ only in rhythm and in tempo. So overall sentence duration was taken from the again from the learners of English, and in that case we received slow, normal, and fast. So was taken from 3 seconds. So we also prepared the sentences which were different in rhythm and in tempo. And in the end, we equalized total duration. And in that case, we received the sentences which were differ only in rhythm. So that's how we prepared the stimuli. And now I can explain you the procedure of the perception experiment. The perception experiment was very long because participants had to come 4 times. Each time they had to listen to the new type of session. And the task was, and the order of the session was randomized for each participant. So they came 4 times and they had to listen to the either original sentences or sentences which were different only in tempo, or sentences which were different only in rhythm, or sentences which were different only in rhythm and tempo altogether. The procedure of the experiment was the following. Participants had to listen to 45 sentences 3 times, and they need to say they need to give the rate the speaker's foreign accent using this scale. So we calculated correlation between the answer given to the stimuli during the second and the third repetition, and all correlations were high, and show that and show the agreement within the within rater agreement. So it means that second and the third repetition, participant gave the same strength of the foreign accent for the stimulus. Now let's look at the results. When our participants had to listen to the stimuli, flat stimuli, from German learners of English, they could and they when they had to listen to the original sentences, they could clearly say who is beginner, who is intermediate, and who is advanced. You can clearly see the differences in between the groups. Then our participant also showed that they also divided our speakers into 3 proficiency groups when they listen the synthesized stimuli, which were different in rhythm and tempo. You can clearly see the difference between beginners, intermediate, and advanced learners. But if you look at the difference between rhythm and tempo, you can clearly see that tempo makes the bigger contribution into the perceived foreign accent than rhythm. These are the results from the French learners of English. Again, when our participants, native English speakers, had to listen to the original, they again could clearly divide them into 3 proficiency groups: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Again, altogether, synthesized stimulus with the rhythm and tempo, you can also see that there is a difference between the groups. When you look at the difference between the stimuli which differ only in rhythm, you can see that there is no difference between intermediate and advanced learners, but there is difference between beginner and intermediate and advanced. And you can also see that tempo makes less contribution than rhythm. And these are the flat stimuli. But when you add the intonation into these sentences, the difference between intermediate and advanced learners becomes significant. And you can see that the contribution of tempo is less now than rhythm. So after this perception experiment, we could say that if native and the target language of the learners are rhythmically similar, tempo makes a bigger contribution into the degree of perceived foreign accent. And now I'm talking about German and English, because German and English are rhythmically similar. If native and target language of the learners are rhythmically different, then rhythm makes a bigger contribution into the degree of perceived foreign accent. And here I'm talking about French and English. They are rhythmically different. We also could say that intonation enhances perception of rhythm, because when we add the intonation contour, the difference between intermediate and advanced learner becomes significant for our participants who perceive foreign accent. So we could say that if the target and native language of the learner are rhythmically similar, then the effect of rhythm on accent rating will be smaller compared to the effect of rhythm if the native and the target language are rhythmically constructed. We also could say that as L2 acquisition progressed, both Germans and French learners of English speakers, they speak faster and with higher degree of duration of variability. If you look at the scheme, the syllables of the beginner were longer, and then with the proficiency level, there is a high variability. So we also can conclude that if native and the target language of the learner are rhythmically similar, native speakers of English classify timing patterns in L2 English based on tempo and ignore differences in rhythm. We also could say that both tempo and rhythm contribute to the perceived foreign accent, but in different proportions. The degree to which the English hears the differences in rhythm and tempo between proficiency levels of L2 learners depends on the native language of the learners. And we also could say that intonation enhances perception of the rhythm differences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leona, for this enlightening talk. Extremely interesting, and it was great to see the progression from experiment 1 to experiment 2, and then to see the conclusions. Thank you very much. The audience, please, if you have any questions or comments, you can write them in the Q&A, and I will share them with Leona. Until I give time for the audience to write, let me just share a couple of questions, if you don't mind, Leona. Okay, what I understand is that you categorize languages into syllable timed languages and stress timed languages. And what I understand again is that you said that when people learn English as a second language, they start using English first as syllable timed, and then the more they progress in proficiency, it becomes stress timed. Now, my question is this a general rule, regardless of the nature of the first language? Like I saw, for example, that Arabic was considered a stress-timed language, while Italian was considered a syllable-timed language. So even if Arab speakers will learn English, they will start from syllable-timed to stress-timed?
Yes, exactly. It's absolutely true. Yes, they will start from more regular rhythm, and then with the proficiency, they will move to the more variability of duration. Yes, exactly. And yeah, that's
regardless of the background. Okay.
No. It doesn't matter what kind of language do you have. Is it a stress or syllable? I'm just trying to avoid this terminology, stress and syllable, but at the same time I'm using it because there are a lot of debates. It doesn't matter, but what is important, even when your language is stressed, you will start from these syllabic patterns, and then you will improve it, as you saw on the graph. So the gerunds did basically the same. So the tendency from the irregular into irregular was the same, even when German and English have similar rhythmic patterns. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a few questions.
If it's okay, I will add something.
Markedness theory. Yes, he will add markedness theory. Yeah, and it's true. Sorry, it's just.
Okay. The trajectory, the development trajectory will be very similar, irrespective of what the nature of the native language of the learner is. However, if the native language of the learner is similar to English, like Arabic and English in this case, then this developmental trajectory will be faster.
I see.
So the overall direction will be similar, but how fast the rhythm will be acquired and what is the final target will be different. So in the experiments that were reported, it was found that French learners could not achieve native-like proficiency in rhythm at all. German learners could do that at the advanced levels.
I see.
But the trajectory is still the same, from syllable timed to stress timed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions of my own, but I will keep this till the end, and I will read the questions of the audience first. I have here Asir Al-Ammar. I'm sorry because I don't see titles, so forgive me if anybody's a doctor or professor. Asir Al-Ammar, thank you so much for this interesting and informative talk. My apologies if any of these questions were answered already, but here it goes. based on the results of the German and French groups, could you say that the bigger the contrast between the two languages, the more likely they are able to detect a foreign accent? Are they detecting what is different regardless of the features?
The bigger contrast between the two languages. The
I
more
think it's a
likely
very
they're able
interesting
to
empirical
detect-
question,
Yeah,
which cannot be answered based on the results of
yeah,
these experiments.
but
It's a
really
question which
very
is very
question.
interesting,
Mhm.
which is worth investigating, but not answerable based on this data.
They're able to do. Yes, that I absolutely agree. We need more experimental work.
Yeah, a different study which is
Mhm.
designed specifically to answer this question would be needed.
Mhm.
Thank you. I have a question here about the abstract or summary of the study. Was the study published already?
Yes, it was published, and the perception part, it's part of my PhD, and I published book.
So
and
do you think we can share a link in the chat box or something? Because the audience are asking if they could have a summary or a link to
yeah,
the
okay,
study.
I will prepare it. All right. Yeah.
Okay, great. And by the way, for those who are asking about the recordings, yes, the recordings will be added to our lab website soon, so you can check there. I have another question here. Thanks for the enlightening. This is from Professor Hala Delbani, our colleague here in Prince Sultan University. And she's saying, thank you for the enlightening presentation. Are you aware of similar studies carried out on Arabic learners of English?
The question is, is it in plan or?
If there are other studies that
No,
were done on Arab speakers, Arab learners.
I'm not familiar with three differences as a production, right? Not as a perception, and with the development. No, I'm not familiar. No. Do you know the literature in that direction?
I remember reading something about production.
Yeah, but not the perception.
Nothing on the top of my tongue. But I remember I read something, whether it was a paper or conference proceeding, I don't know.
So perhaps this could be another project.
Maybe.
Yeah.
By the way, Professor,
and again, for the perception study, this is something I'm quite sure nothing has been done yet.
Yeah, no. This is for sure. About the production, I mean, it wasn't.
For the study, I really liked the question that was asked like a bit earlier about the perception of foreign accent in L2 depending on your L1. That was very neat question, which really calls for empirical investigation.
Well, I think any collaboration work are more than welcome. So it's if somebody are interested, we are very happy to share the material and to explain the procedure. And yes, we are very open for the collaboration. And you perfectly know
at the end of the talk, for everybody, asking Leona and Mikhail just to share their emails, that you can always contact them at the same time directly.
Yes, sure. Sure.
I have another question here, again from Asil. Have you taken into account participants' English second language exposure? Have they been exposed to the same accent as the one in the experiment to factor out effects of prosodic differences between English accents?
Yeah, but when we are talking about the perception experiment, the thing is that we used the sounds and the melody, the intonation from the native English speakers. That was the point. So we completely reduced the accentedness by itself. So, of course, when they heard the original sentences, yeah, we did not the manipulation, but you could clearly see the difference. They just put them into the three groups. Was this question about the perception or about the production part?
Asil perhaps can, let me try to see
Because-
Asil, the audience. Asil, I give you the privilege to talk. If you'd like to talk and explain to us your question.
Hi, thank you so
Hi.
much.
Thank you.
Sorry for taking up so much of your time. I was just wondering, and again, I'm sorry if this was answered and I didn't hear it, but in the perception studies, and this might be hard to know, but were the participants who were listening exposed to the same English foreign accent? Usually, just to see if there's any differences in prosodic differences between English accents, someone who speaks more of an American accent or a British accent or an Australian accent.
Oh,
That
right,
might not
actually.
even be a factor, but that's why I'm asking.
I used to work with the English population, the English people from UK. So, and they were in most of the cases, they were from one area. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
our listeners, they were from one area and they were from UK, not from States, not from Australia. So they were very kind of local, from one area people. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your talk.
Asil, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'm my name is Asil Ammar and I'm from Princess Noura University. I'm an assistant professor in phonology and I'm very much interested in what you're talking about. So thank you.
Thank you very
Asil,
much.
thank you very much for joining
your
our
question.
webinar. And please do feel free to contact Leona and Mikhail later because I can see that you're interested and I can see your question.
Oh, very much so. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Dr. Ahmed bin Saad Al-Arrafa. Based on this study, does it help to learn second language speech via musical rhythm? For example, playing second language songs?
I think I can divide my question my answer into two groups. My personal opinion, I really do believe that when you're learning language, you need to learn language. I mean, classical vocabulary, writing, and all these boring stuff. I really do not believe in miracle and in a magic, what is happening in the, but it's my personal opinion. I do apologize for this. So about the singing the song, if we think it in theory, probably at the level of the advanced, it will help you to speak faster. Yeah, why not? Yeah. It's just imagine you are following the rhythm and you are improving your tempo, and of course it will reduce your accent when everything is okay with your phonetics and with your vocabulary, with your grammar, and with all this stuff. Yeah, it helps. Yeah, that's true. But I'm classical school at this point. Sorry.
Thank you. We have another question.
Pardon.
No, please, Mikhail, please. It's a discussion.
Please join.
I wanted to add something to this, to answer to this question. I witnessed some very nice practical activities based on musical rhythm that I think were entertaining and helpful. I forgot the name, but if you write to me, I can give you the name of two people who are doing that. The thing is that they're doing that not more than 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes during the class. So it's kind of resetting activity for tired students before they move on to another targeted tiresome activity. So, and it really helps, especially at intermediate to advanced levels, to gain fluency. But it's not like singing pop songs. It's really more like reciting with music giving a rhythm that exists in kind of more childish-like poems set to melody, nothing else. Da-da, 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 da-da. And now say that without music. 2-3 sentences, 2 minutes, finish. So don't build the whole pronunciation activity around it. Otherwise, you will waste time. But as a drop-in funny activity in between, that's useful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have another question. If you don't mind, Mikhail, because this is actually the second part of the session, but I just want to miss the question. Based on the parameter of this study, duration and rhythm, does speech foreign accent appear more in vowels than consonants, or both?
The combination of the duration, not only vowels but also consonants. Yes, that was the syllable structure changed. So the vowels become shorter, and the consonant, of course, consonantal clusters change. So this is the whole picture.
Professor Hana Delbani, who's actually our professor of phonetics and phonology in our university. So she's just making a comment, and she's saying many of our Arab learners have never been out of Saudi Arabia, but they have perfected the rhythm and stress of English from watching movies. So this could also be helpful.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I do believe this. When you look without translation, it really helps. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it's 9, so we should be moving to the second talk. Thank you very much, Leona.
Thank you.
An enlightening talk, and it was so enjoyable as well. So thank you very much. And Mikhail, now, if you'd like to share screen, the floor is yours.
Okay. I first need to launch it. And to go to this one. No. You're sharing this screen. Okay, does it work? Good.
Yes, you
And
can.
I don't know what I'm going to use to show what I'm talking about on the screen. Do you see the mouse?
Yes, we do.
Good. So I'm going to present a couple of studies which might be more academic and less interesting than the honors. But I find the topic of rhythm fascinating for several reasons, including evolutionary ones. So first, I'm going to talk about, to say a few words about the methodological approach to rhythm that I undertake in my overall agenda when I approach this multifaceted phenomenon. Rhythmic patterns in speech I consider to be naturally occurring but culturally transmitted. What do I mean by that? All humans, irrespective of their native language, irrespective of which country they're coming from, we all have the same neurocognitive mechanisms. We have the same articulatory apparatus for speech production. At the same time, rhythmic patterns are different between languages. So once rhythmic patterns emerge in a particular language, they are modified according to the norms of a particular ambient language, and then they're culturally transmitted through generations, right? So rhythmic patterns are culturally transmitted, but they're very natural. They're very natural because speech is a kind of a motor activity, and every kind of motor activity is rhythmic in nature. To explore the phenomenon, to explore the behavioral patterns that are naturally occurring but culturally transmitted, I kind of adopted an approach from biology, from ecological biology, that was first proposed by Tim Bergens, who got his Nobel Prize in the 20s, to study behavior. Yeah. So he suggested that every behavior should be studied in ontogenesis, that is, how this behavior develops in individuals when individual organisms go through different stages of their development in the course of life. In phylogenesis, that is, how this behavior emerged in particular evolutionary lineage. In our case, we are talking about humans. What is a functional load of this behavior? And what are the proximate mechanisms, neurocognitive mechanisms, which enable this behavior? And I'm going to talk you through some studies that we conducted, falling into different aspects: ontogenesis, phylogenesis, functional load, and proximate mechanisms of speech rhythm. First, I will talk you through this study, which we accomplished several years ago in 2019, I guess, when we looked at the universality of and linguistic experience in the perception of speech. Why we asked this question and what does it mean? There are contradictory evidence regarding perception of speech rhythm. There is evidence suggesting that processing of rhythm is influenced by linguistic experience, because speech rhythm is processed by a phonological filter of the native language. So your native language actually influences the way your brain processes rhythmic patterns. Alternatively, there is evidence suggesting that rhythmic patterns are filtered via basic neurophysiological mechanisms, which are shared by all people. And that is why not affected by linguistic experience. Okay, let's consider some evidence suggesting that rhythmic patterns in speech may be processed via phonological filter of the language. We know that speakers of rhythmically contrastive languages employ different cues to find the edges of the words in continuous speech. When I talk, I do not talk in separate words. But somehow you manage to split my continuous speech that sometimes doesn't have clear signals where one word begins and another word ends. You manage to split this continuous mass into discrete units, word-like units. And there is evidence that people from languages with different rhythms will use different cues to find the beginning and ends of the words. And that is why it is difficult, for example, for speakers of French to learn to segment English, and for speakers of English to learn to segment French. Because we simply segment based on, split the speech into words based on different cues. And what is important for speakers of one language and what English speakers will be listening for to find the beginning and ends of the words in French will be different from what the French speakers will provide them with. Another evidence that actually linguistic experience really interacts with perception of rhythm is a few studies that Leona has presented showing that non-native rhythmic patterns in utterances which are produced by second language speakers contribute to perceived accentedness. And also there were studies by Tajima in 1997, quite old, but super interesting study, showing that non-native rhythm impairs intelligibility of speech. We also know that rhythm influences acquisition of particular languages. That is, babies learning French, for example, and babies learning English will develop their trajectories in language acquisition slightly differently because the rhythmic patterns in their languages differ. On the other hand, we know that adults, pre-linguistic babies, and even animals can differentiate between languages that are perceived to be rhythmically contrastive. That is, remember the stimuli that Leona presented with sa, 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 sa. If we take this sa, 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 sa stimuli devised from English or Arabic, and more like sa, 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 sa kind of stimuli from Japanese or French, we know that babies can differentiate between these two different sa-sa-sa stimuli produced from stress-timed and from syllable-timed languages. Even the babies who are 4 days old, 4 days, so they haven't had experience with their native language yet, but they can do it. So it suggests that there is something inside our brain, something with which we are already born that enables us to do this task. Something that is not dependent on linguistic experience. We also know that regular rhythms, for example, coupled with neural oscillations with brain rhythms and facilitate attention better than irregular rhythms. So, contradictory branch of evidence showing that perception of speech rhythm is universal to all humans, irrespective of their native language. What is right? We decided to set up a short experiment to understand, at least in terms of rhythmic discrimination, if linguistic experience allows for better discrimination of rhythmic patterns or not. In the first experiment, we recruited French and German native speakers. Why we chose French and German populations? We selected Germans because German is a stress-timed language. The idea of having stress-timed language is that it has both high and low variability. That is, in stress-timed languages, it is quite possible to produce a sentence with low variability. In a syllable-timed language, like French, the sentences tend to be only syllable-timed. So Germans have richer experience with rhythmic patterns than French. So if the prediction, if native language influences the rhythm discrimination, then Germans who have richer experience with a wider range of rhythmic patterns will be better than French native speakers. The experiment that we conducted was an AX discrimination experiment. An AX discrimination experiment is the following. So you play stimulus A, then you play stimulus X, and you ask participant to say if X is similar to A or different from A. So in our case, we had A stimulus for 5 seconds, then half a second pause, and then X stimulus for another 5 seconds. We created stimuli that were regular or syllable timed and irregular or stress timed. And we created 4 types of these pairs, like regular, 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 irregular, irregular, regular, and irregular, irregular. Let me play some examples of stimuli to show what it means, what it sounded like. So, the first one, I'm going to play that again. This is a regular rhythm, an example of regular rhythm. And this is an example of an irregular. This one. Pardon. I think I better play it, say it out loud rather than trying to catch it. So we concatenated random syllables, and some syllables were varied in duration and sounded like blah 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 blah. And in other cases, all the syllables were equal in duration, like blah 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 blah. So we had 4 types of stimuli pair, like regular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular. Now, tell me if the procedure is clear and if you understand what the stimuli sounded like.
You can write in the chat if you'd like. Just yes, if they
any question, because I would like this to be clearly understood before I move on to presenting the results.
Or if you have questions, you can of course write in the Q&A or raise your hand and I'll unmute. Seems everything is clear.
Okay, so if everything is clear, I will move on. Now, these are the results. We used A prime as a measure of sensitivity. So that's a measure of signal detection theory. And it's not classical D prime because in many cases, people responded at ceiling level. So they were giving 100% of correct responses. It presented, like it introduced some difficulties in using standard D prime. So we used A prime. What you can see here is the accuracy for French and German learners of English when the first stimulus, like A stimulus in AX pair, had irregular rhythm. And you see that when the rhythm was irregular, we did not see significant differences in performance between French and German learners. This is the chance level. Everybody was above chance and like the performance was very high. If the first stimulus, like A stimulus in AX discrimination was regular, had regular rhythm, again, we did not see any differences between French and German participants. That means that, at least in this experiment, the accuracy, the sensitivity, is not influenced by native language, by rhythm or in the native language of the speaker. What is interesting is that overall, performance was higher in the condition when A stimulus had regular rhythm compared to the condition when A stimulus had irregular rhythm, showing that regularity in A stimulus, in AX pair, facilitates performance. Here you can see the response bias, showing that actually there was no bias in response across two groups, and there was no difference in bias between the two groups. The bias is like, we had to make sure that participants in one group, for example, French participants, are not more likely to say similar, or different than in German. You see that the response is almost indistinguishable from zero in all four conditions, meaning that there was no skewness, there was no bias to say similar or different. Here, on this graph, you can see the reaction time. If I go back to this description of the experiment, so again, people heard A stimulus, then there was a short pause, and then they heard X stimulus, and they had to say if X is similar to or different from A. But they could give the response whenever they thought they were ready. So they could give the response here, or 1 second after, or 2 seconds after, and so on. So for the reaction time, we took the difference, the lag between the onset of the X stimulus and the time when the participants actually responded if X was similar to or different from A. This is what we saw. Again, you see 4 different types of pairs: regular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular. And you can see that in case when the A stimulus, first stimulus, thank you, had regular rhythm, the reaction time was shorter. So in these two, here and here, the reaction time is lower than here and here. Again, suggesting that regularity in A stimulus enhances perception and facilitates performance in the task. However, we did not find any difference between German and French participants. So again, no effect of language background on performance in this task. That was fun because initially we did expect the effect of the language, which did not show up here. We didn't like it first, so we asked, maybe our stimuli, like the sequence of random syllables, maybe these stimuli were not considered as speech. They were not thought to be linguistic enough. And that is why the brain does not engage the mechanisms which are specific for speech. And that is why we don't see the effect of the language. So we thought that in the next experiment, we had to do the stimuli which are more linguistic. The second concern is how generalizable the results are across different parameters and language pairs. That is, you see on this graph that in many cases, the performance was close to ceiling, 100% correct responses, suggesting that maybe the task was too easy for people. And if we change the parameters, if we make the rhythmic differences more subtle, then people will be, then we will be able to see the effect of the language. Or maybe French and German is a strange language pair, and this lack of linguistic experience can be observed only when we have French and they're kind of funny people, or German and they're funny people. So we wanted to replicate the results on different language pairs to be able to generalize the results before we go to publication. So again, we used AX discrimination experiments. This time we used Spanish and English native speakers using the same logic, English being stress-timed language. As a stress-timed language, it allows both stress-timed and syllable-timed rhythmic patterns in the language, which means that English have richer linguistic experience with a wider range of rhythm types than Spanish native speakers. So if there is an effect of linguistic experience, then English should perform better than Spanish in rhythm discrimination task. And we used two types of the stimuli. First, non-linguistic. And for non-linguistic, we used exactly the stimuli that were like very similar stimuli as in the previous experiment. So just random concatenations of syllables in random order. For the linguistic material, for the linguistic stimuli, we did the following. So we recorded Welsh sentences, and we made sure that none of our participants was familiar with Welsh as in their life. So we recorded Welsh sentences. Then we resynthesized them by substituting all the phonemes that don't exist in Spanish by the closest phonemes which do exist in Spanish or in English. And then we imposed intonational contour on that. I want to play you what these sentences, resynthesized sentences, sounded like. And another. So these are these are the examples of linguistic stimuli we used. So they're incomprehensible, but they sound much more language-like than our random concatenations of syllables. So remember the experiments, like the non-linguistic stimuli. And linguistic stimuli. Very different. And we thought that the second type of stimuli sounded more like natural language and are more likely to engage specific speech processing mechanisms. When we created these sentences, Welsh-based sentences, we used and manipulated the duration of vowels in some of these sentences by compressing or extending the vowel durations. And this kind of adds variability in the vowel duration. So we made some of these sentences more stress-timed. As an example, the first one, so I play it to you again, like unmanipulated, where the duration is not manipulated. And then the same sentence with manipulated durations. So the first one being more syllable timed, the second one being more stress timed. The procedure was identical, AX discrimination experiment, but the task was much more difficult this time. And that is why we did not allow people to give their response until they finish listening to the X stimulus to the end. And it means we couldn't analyze reaction time. So we only focus on accuracy in the second experiment. Let's have a look what we got. Again, we used A prime just to be consistent and to use the same analytic approaches in the first experiment. And this is what you see. So the responses of English native speakers and Spanish native speakers on the stimuli when on the pairs when a stimulus had regular or irregular rhythm, on linguistic and non-linguistic material. You can see that basically the result pattern on linguistic and a non-linguistic material was replicated. And again, if the A stimulus in the pair had regular rhythm, performance was higher compared to those cases when A stimulus had irregular rhythm in Spanish. So you can see that this is higher than this. And the same for the English native speakers. This is higher than this. So again, rhythmic regularity facilitate in A stimulus allows people to better detect if this X stimulus is rhythmically similar to or different from A stimulus. This was a short normalizing study showing that indeed our linguistic stimuli were perceived as natural speech, as natural language in an unfamiliar, like strange, but natural language, and that is indeed perceived like that is more likely to engage speech-specific mechanisms. So the conclusion that we made is that the auditory system responsible for speech rhythm detection and processing is not influenced by linguistic experience. So it is shared by all people. It is very flexible, which allows for rhythmic variability across languages. But the basic mechanisms of speech processing, speech rhythm detection are not modulated by language. They're not dependent on language, and they are biological in their nature, deeply biological in their nature. This result is published in Journal of Speech, Language, and Hearing Research. If anyone is more interested in more detail, this is where these details can be found. So before we continue, do you have any questions on this? On
your hand, and I would allow you to unmute. Seems everything is clear.
Okay, then how much time do I have left?
We still have around 20 minutes.
Okay, then we go on. Then we ask the question, what are the functions of speech rhythm? We know that rhythm facilitates speech processing, it tunes attention, and it can express pragmatic meanings. And now I will talk through a couple of studies when we looked at signaling and inferring cooperation by speech rhythm. As a background, we took several studies that show that cooperation and the degree of rhythmic entrainment in speech production are very highly correlated. So if people are more friendly towards each other, their speech is more rhythmically similar. It's been known for quite some time. The question is whether this entrainment, rhythmic entrainment between two interlocutors is perceived by a third person, and whether a third person is able to make any inferences whether these two people who are communicating are friends or not friends. So we studied social entrainment and the perception of social entrainment. So in other words, our research question was whether rhythmic entrainment in vocalization is perceived as a cooperation signal. Why can it be so? We know that regular rhythm provides some expectancy cues for easier rhythmic entrainment. So if my rhythm is regular, or more syllable timed, if you like, it is more easier for somebody to entrain to my rhythm. So we studied if people make pragmatic inferences. As I said, the inferences, for example, about whether people are friends or not friends, based on rhythmic convergence, that is how similar rhythm in their utterances sounds like, and based on rhythmic regularity in speech, because regularity enables this convergence, facilitates this convergence. For this, we created an artificial language with words using intonational contour. So kind of we modeled simple Silk-Erik's prosodic hierarchy in our artificial language. And we, for analytical purposes, we split rhythm at two different levels of analysis, the level of pulse and the level of meter. So the level of pulse is the rhythm, we can call it syllabic rhythm, which is kind of occurrence of salient acoustic events, which is also used for beat induction. It is very, like, in essence, it is very similar to the concept of rhythm we were talking about so far, like syllabic rhythm variability in duration of vocalic and consonantal intervals in utterances. Because the pulse, the psychological pulse, and the acoustic pulse is the onset of the vowel. So the onset of the vowel is the sharp, acoustical is a sharp increase in intensity, which leads to the neurons firing in the basic hearing nerve. Yeah. However, there is a different concept of rhythm, which we will refer to as meta, which is hierarchical organization of psychological events of these beats based on their relative salience, and grouping these events, these pulses, into hierarchical structure. So here we get like iambic meter, trochaic meter, when one syllable is more prominent because it is because it bears lexical stress, and some group with lexical stress is more prominent than another group with lexical stress because it bears phrasal stress and so on. So rhythm can also be conceptualized as a device for hierarchical organization of syllables or beats into patterns, into groups. I will play you some what I'm talking about, some sounds to illustrate what I'm talking about. So this is the rhythmic pulse. So each sa is a pulse, tan, 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 tan. But we can group these pulses into hierarchical patterns. Probably, I assume, like being a native Arabic speakers, you probably perceive the groups of 4 syllables with second syllable in each group more prominent than the other 3. And this is also rhythm, but at different level. So 2 concepts, and convergence can happen both at the level of pulse and at the level of meter. So again, we created pairs of regular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular, irregular, and irregular, regular patterns in rhythm and in meter, and created 2 different experiments, one on pulse and one on meter. So on pulse, it was like this. And now I play your regular, regular pulse pair.
Nisela li fe nusinelo milu fe finamo minor mafime susifale li samu nisofu.
Okay. Doesn't want to play. I move it left and it jumps to the previous. Sorry. But okay, so regular, regular, these are 2.
Nisela li fe nusinelo milu fe finamo minor mafime susifale li samu nisofu.
2 utterances like this. Irregular, irregular, 2 utterances like this.
Fime su misela li samu ninno masife numi fale sinelo nilu fe li sofu finamo.
I hope you can clearly hear that regularity is broken here.
Fime su misela li samu ninno masife numi fale sinelo nilu fe li sofu finamo.
Okay. And we also had irregular, regular, and regular, irregular pairs. People had to listen to the pair of stimuli produced by different voices. And then they had to say, if these 2 interacting agents, and we had like small little aliens talking to each other, if these 2 interacting agents are friendly or hostile towards each other. That's it. All they could use, as you can imagine, is the rhythmic patterns, which were either regular or irregular in speech of these 2 agents that are talking. And now let's have a look at what the responses of our listeners were. Here you can see the percentage of responses that people are friendly, depending on the pair of the stimuli, whether the rhythm was regular, regular, irregular, irregular, regular, irregular, or irregular, regular. You can see that when both agents, both aliens, had regular rhythm in their utterances, in 70% of cases, people said that these are friends. When people, when our aliens had irregular rhythm in both of the utterances, like the first alien and the second, our listeners said that these aliens are hostile to each other. When one of the utterances was regular and the other alien, in the other utterances produced irregular rhythm, or in a different order, regular, people were at a loss and their responses were at chance level at 50%. So they responded randomly. They didn't know what to say, because we think that regularity sends a very strong signal of friendliness, of readiness to cooperate. And when this signal is sent by both aliens, people say that the aliens are friends. When this signal is sent by none of these aliens, people say that aliens are not friends. And when this signal is sent by only one of the two aliens, people are at a loss. They don't know what to say and they respond randomly. Now, on this graph, you can see that when the pair were regular, then these pairs were 4 times more likely to elicit the response that our aliens are friends compared to irregular pairs. So the odd ratio was 4.2. In the second experiment, the procedure was the same, but we conceptualized rhythm as meter or hierarchical organization. And now I can play you some stimuli to show what it sounded like. So for meter regularity, here you can see irregular meter.
So you can
understand that to introduce meter, we had to introduce stress in our artificial language. So we had to make some syllables stressed, and this stress had to be distributed regularly or irregularly along the sentence. And here is the example when stress is distributed irregularly. In this case, 50% of the words in the artificial language were iambic and 50% of the artificial words were trochaic. If we had regular meter, like here, all words had trochaic patterns. What is important is that we kept pulse regular throughout, everywhere. We only manipulated the distribution of stresses. And here you can see that if the meter was regular, so if both aliens, the first and the second, produced only trochaic stress patterns, our listeners responded that these aliens are probably friends. In all other conditions, in all other patterns, their responses were at chance level, 50%. And again, when we took only regular and irregular patterns, we found that regular patterns, pairs, those pairs when the first and the second aliens had trochaic rhythm, they were 1.5 times more likely to elicit the response that participants are cooperating compared to irregular patterns. The conclusion so far is that there is a link between the perception of social affiliation and regularity in speech-like signal. At the level of pulse, isochrony or regular temporal distribution of acoustic events will be the marker of cooperation. Isochronous pulse is perceived as a cooperation signal, even when it is emitted by only one of the interlocutors. But at the level of meter, in addition to temporal regularity, in addition to temporal, like meter consistency can also provide like an additional marker of cooperation behavior. But overall, meter is a weaker marker of cooperation than pulse. Okay, how am I doing with time?
We could have a few minutes, like 2-3 minutes, just to allow 5 minutes for questions at the end.
I think I will not talk you through this second experiment here to save this time. And we can move to the questions now.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for the enlightening talk, Mikhail. Really, I mean, it was extremely interesting to listen to all this development of the effect of linguistic experience. I never thought about it, to be honest. And also the relation between regularity and social affiliation. For me, quite new concepts. I'm not sure about our audience. So thank you very much for sharing this excellent information. And for the audience, please, if you'd like to ask a question, you can just raise your hand or you can use the Q&A. Let me just ask a question then, since until I mean, give them time to write the question. Now, for the effect of linguistic experience, I liked a lot, of course, how you moved from one study to another. But are you considering any further replications?
Any what?
Further replications?
No, not at the moment, because I think that this question doesn't require further work. I mean,
yeah,
it's been replicated on 2 different populations with 2 different types of material.
Yeah, I see. It is actually, I liked a lot of the way that you were moving always from one experiment and then that drives another experiment. And this was always very interesting. All right, we have our first question here. Copies of the studies. Again, I think already Michaela has already shared the study. Can we show this again, please, if you don't mind? Michael, you already showed.
Yes.
I also prepared the link. I prepared the list of the papers so they can send them into the chat or.
Yes, please. That would be great through the chat.
Where I should. Okay. Yeah. 1 second.
The chat. Yes.
I tried to upload all the papers on ResearchGate.
Excellent. So if we could have your
they
link.
Are all there, all of them, with some very few exceptions. But many are not in journal format.
Ah, okay.
Because many papers were, when they were published, they were not open access. And according to the rules, the author is not allowed to share the version of record, what it's called.
Right, right.
But it's the text is identical in version of record and in the one which is uploaded on ResearchGate. If anyone wants a version of record, that can be shared absolutely legally privately. So just write an email, write a message on ResearchGate, say that you want a version of record, and we'll send the version of record to you. It will be my pleasure and honor.
It is our pleasure, really. I mean, today I've learned so much about rhythm. Never thought it was that really influential. Thank you so much. And since we're coming now to the end of our webinar, I have shared with you, with everybody, a link. If you don't mind, if you could just fill it out in the chat box in order to receive your e-certificate within a week. I need to thank again our distinguished speakers today, Dr. Lyona Polyanskaya, Dr. Michael Orden. Thank you very much for these enlightening talks. We really appreciate it. Thank you for accepting our invitation. It was a real honor having you, and we hope to pursue the collaboration in the future, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. Now we are starting Ramadan, so we will not have a webinar in April, but we will be back with our regular monthly webinars in May. So please do follow our Twitter account to know our activities and events. Thank you very much and have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.